Now that the global economy has started to recover from the wrath of Leagues 5, I felt like going through everything that was in the league to see how they held up in retrospect. On the player side, it's a good chance to see how much of our planning and theory crafting pre-leagues came true, and on the game design side, we could see what parts of the league made it a fun experience, and which parts could still be improved for the next one. But first, my credentials, as they are so important. You all need to know how seriously to take my opinions after all. This was only my second ever league, the first being the previous Leagues 4 Trailblazer Reloaded. I managed to get Dragon rank in both, though definitely not in the fastest or most efficient ways. My goal in Leagues is what I imagine it is for most players, to reach some pre-planned, overpowered end goal setup, use that to farm every PVM encounter I need, and then clean up the easiest tasks left over until we get to Dragon rank so we can quit. Outside of the league, I have a 2200 total level Iron Man, and a pigeon who is just the cutest little creature ever. Just look at her. Aww. Right, now let's get into it. Overall, was Leagues 5 any good? I would have to say, yes, very much so. While I can't speak for Leagues 1 through 3, number 5 definitely feels like a major improvement over number 4. While the core concept is the same, there's a lot of improvements in there to make it a much better experience. I ended up feeling much more powerful at the end of this league than I did last time, which is to me what it's all about. Plus, there was just a huge number of small changes in there that made it a much smoother experience, with a lot less unnecessary friction. Stuff as small as reducing the respawn time on everything had a massive impact on my enjoyment of it, so kudos to the JMod team for taking the time to think about this sort of thing. Let's really get into the meat of it, starting with the relics. The core of the league rests on its relics, so let's go through all of those now. What makes a good relic? To me, it's about creating a new experience you'd never face in the main game. Sure, they need to be powerful, Leagues is a power fantasy first and foremost, but it's not just about that. More like modding your GTA San Andreas to add spaceships and Bigfoot than it is activating cheat codes to give yourself infinite money in God mode. You want to add new experiences to the game, not just massively speed up everything that exists. You also want there to be interesting choices at every relic tier. This makes it feel like you're truly carving your own path. If one relic is clearly better than the others in its tier, well then everyone just takes that one and we all end up on the same path. You're not really making a choice anymore, and it kills the desire people might have to do multiple playthroughs. So let's go through each tier and see how they did. At tier 1 we have the basic gathering skilling relics. I took Animal Wrangler here as I felt that getting large amounts of good food was going to be the most useful to me, since I was going to be doing a lot of PVM. The Hunter boosts were just a bonus, and to be honest, I'm not sure why they added them here. It seems powerful enough without them. I think this might be just what pushed this one over the edge, as most people seem to agree with me on this one and make the same choice. Though I did see plenty of power miner takers as well, which was a very fair choice too. Mining is a skill that can be a real roadblock to trade if you don't have regions with good mining content in them, especially since you can't AFK it really. Power miner fixes all that, no matter what other choices you made for in your setup. Lumberjack was definitely the weakest of the bunch, though I did still see a good few people take it. Woodcutting is a very easy and AFK skill, with basically all of its content available in the starting region, so it's not a very appealing skill to boost. Plus, the relic's secondary abilities just aren't that useful. Fire making is already a really fast skill, while not being at all useful, and since the fletching ability only makes arrow shafts, it's not going to give you enough XP to let you skip fletching altogether, so you're going to have to find another training method anyway. I am told a lot of people took it specifically because they don't like woodcutting and wanted it to be over as soon as possible, which is fair enough. I guess this tier comes down to whether you want to reduce the time you spend doing the things you don't like, or make the time you spend doing the activities you do like as rewarding as possible. I think that's a good design, so I would give tier 1 an A rank. I think Lumberjack could have done with a buff to make it a bit more appealing versus the other two, but it's not laughably weak. For tier 2, we have 3 more skilling focused relics for 3 skills not covered in the first tier, that being agility, herblore, and thieving. I took dodgy deals here, and from what I saw it was about an even split between people taking the same as me or friendly forager. In my entire time playing, I only recall seeing one person wearing the Sage's Greaves from Corner Cutter, and I played a lot of hours this league. Now, agility sucks, and when I first read about these relics, I was planning to take Corner Cutter too, but once I got told about how dodgy deals boosts underwater thieving, it became immediately useless. We ended up in the awkward situation where the thieving relic was a better agility booster than the actual agility relic. This feels like an oversight, but I'm kinda glad they made it. I really don't want to be stuck running rooftop laps in a league. Dodgy Deals, however, was an amazing pick. It was really nice to be able to get use out of all that thieving content that's normally too slow or too rare to succeed to ever be viable in the main game, like gem stalls and pickpocketing the Tazar. I got a ton of use out of this one. Friendly Forager seems pretty solid as well. The way I see it, you have 3 possible choices you can make to get your Herblord needs taken care of, 4 if you count the reloaded relic. And if you're not planning on taking one of the other ones, then this is a good chance to get that sorted. I like that Herblord got this treatment, with multiple options to solve the skill. I just wish they could have done it for some of the other skills as well, as most all others only get touched in 1 relic. For me, I was planning on taking Overgrown anyway, so I knew I'd have herbs to spare and wouldn't need this, but I know plenty of people who got good use out of this. I'd give this tier a B rank. It's a letdown that one of the relics is near useless, but the other 2 were solid. Tier 3 is the teleport tier, and I won't waste time in telling you that this tier is a bit of a joke. Everyone took Clue Compass and no one took the other 2, and it's not hard to see why. Even ignoring the rapid fire clue solving ability of it, being able to teleport to any stash unit, or clue step if you take the time to get the one you need, just gives you way better teleport coverage than the other 2 options. Clue steps are everywhere, so you're almost guaranteed to have a pretty close teleport to any location you'd want to go to. Plus, it's giving you teleports to areas that don't already have them. The major problem with bank heists is that basically every bank in the game already has a teleport near it anyway, as banks are located in the major settlements that already have their own transport options. It's a similar story with Fairy's Flight. If I need to get to a fairy ring, I could just as easily clue compass myself to Edgeville and use the fairy ring there to get to them all anyway. And there aren't very many spirit trees in the game either, so they're pretty useless. And while going to tool leprechauns is nice for farm runs, I'm not going to need to do anywhere near enough of them to make taking the mushroom worth it. In my time with the compass, and with my regions being Varlamore, Fremnik and Desert, it was very rare that I ever found myself needing to get to a place that I couldn't reach quickly just with the compass. And in the cases where I couldn't use it, it was usually a good alternative I could get my hands on anyway, like the Pharaoh Scepter. I do want to point out though how annoying it was to have to scroll through the massive list of unusable teleports from outside your regions each time you used it. There's a RuneLite plugin that fixed this, but this sort of thing really should be in the base game. Let's try and remove unnecessary friction where we can like this. But yes, this tier was a very obvious choice, and for that reason I'm giving it a D rank. The compass was very good, but the other 2 options are just so weak by comparison that there's no interesting decision to make. You'd either have to nerf the compass or come up with some other very powerful alternatives to fix this tier. For tier 4, it's 3 wild and impossible to group relics. Due to how these work, it's pretty hard to tell what everyone else took, but I went for Golden God, which seemed like a pretty popular choice based on how many people were placing coins on the Lumbridge altar for all hours of the day. It was quite hard to tell how this one would play out before the league started. I had wondered if it would turn into an infinite money printer, and due to the way it interacts with shops, it absolutely did. I was actually disappointed to find this out, as I'd expected we need to go farm the alkaballs ourselves from like Vorkath or Slayer, and then use Golden God to go to town on them. But it turned out that just mass buying rune plate bodies or condensed gold when you get to that, and alking them to buy more of the same, worked way better than that. It made a huge amount of the dropped items completely worthless since I now had access to infinite money anyway, and I'm not sure if that's a gameplay loop I'd want to see again. Still, infinite money was fun to have. Getting to abuse the stonemason to do ridiculous construction methods is always going to be a fun time. Adding a prayer training method to it as well I think is pretty clever. It's a skill that doesn't really fit in anywhere else, and it gives a good method to anyone who doesn't have access to something like Vorkath, or who doesn't want to sit at Soul Wars all day. We also have Reloaded, which starts off seemingly incredibly deep, but then actually becomes a lot less interesting the more you think about it. Let's walk through it. If you take Reloaded, you have access to tier 3, 2 and 1 relics. You're not going to take a second tier 3 relic, as we previously discussed that only one of them is any good. In tier 2, one of the 3 is also useless, so you're only really getting one more relic to choose. That just leaves tier 1, which by its nature is the weakest tier, and then taking one of those in your tier 4 slot kind of feels like a waste. This to me leaves Reloaded feeling rather unappealing. I think it would have benefited a huge amount from being just 1 or 2 tiers higher to give us a lot more relics to choose from, although maybe that would have made it too powerful. Still, it's not a bad choice to take, just not as interesting as it could have been. And last up in this tier is Equilibrium, which I think is the most fine relic I think you could ever design. It boosts everything you're doing, but only in a really small way, and unless you're going to do some specific methods that get extra boosted by it, it doesn't really change anything about the way you play the game. You're still training as normal, just slightly faster than you already were, which with the league's multiplier is already really fast. I imagine someone who wanted to get all of the 50 million experience tasks might appreciate the time this one saves, but I think for most people it's probably not worth it. Overall then, I'm giving this tier a C rank. All three are viable, but only one of them is particularly great. Though these three relics are also weird that it's always going to be tough to balance. For tier 5, it's Clues versus Slayer and then also Production Master for some reason. Again, it's hard to tell due to the nature of it, but from my experience, most people chose one of the first two. I went for the clue one, as I just like doing clues anyway, and trying to do all the clue tasks without this was going to be thoroughly unappealing. Plus, getting things like God D'hide was going to be a nice gear upgrade before I could get myself properly set up in my endgame loadout. They did reduce the number of points you could get from clue scroll tasks compared to League's 4, which is a welcome change as it makes this feel less like a required relic. I liked using it, though I can imagine for some people's setups, clues aren't going to provide them much gear they need, so it's not going to do much for them. Slayer Master was also a very popular choice. The first line is by far the most relevant part of it, the ability to always be on task for relevant monsters. Obviously, if you have access to a Slayer helmet, then that's a big damage boost across the board to almost everything you're killing, but also a lot of other benefits in there when you start thinking about it. You can kill anything you want to power level Slayer, so no need wasting time on any crap tasks. Just kill the best thing all the time. And farming superiors and getting their drops is also way easier with this. And of course, there's a bunch of tasks associated with those superiors, so again, it feels like you don't have to miss out too much on doing the clue tasks. And of course, any Slayer bosses you might want to farm are no longer arbitrarily limited to the number the Slayer Master thought of, so go ham! I think of all the relics I didn't take, this was the one I was the most disappointed to miss out on. It seemed like a lot of fun, almost like a complete rework of the Slayer skill we could have gotten if all the tedium was cut out. And then we have Production Master, which feels like a weird choice to be here, but I guess I had to go somewhere. While I imagine this does make production skilling insanely fast experience, I found that in my game time, the thing that bottlenecked my skilling gains was not the time to process items, but getting those resources to process in the first place, which this doesn't do anything to help. All the production skills are pretty fast experience anyway, so taking this feels like a bit overkill. If you're the sort of person going for 200 mil all in the leagues and don't care about much else, this is probably amazing. But for me, I'd rather have relics that change the gameplay in more significant ways than just making them faster. Overall though, I would give this tier an S rank. All three of these relics are really powerful, and you can make a good argument for taking any of them, which is bang on what you want to see. At tier 6, we have two previous classics, Total Recall versus Banker's Note. In terms of power, it's not even close. Banker's Note is so absurdly good that Total Recall can't really compete in any meaningful way. Think about it. What's the most common 2 points you'll want to teleport between? An activity, like a boss or a skilling zone, and a bank. But that's irrelevant when you are the bank. Plus, Banker's Note works in instances, gives you access to infinite food to help carry you through things like Inferno, makes rune crafting really fast, and so many other things that there's absolutely no contest. Banker's Note is the stronger choice by far. And so I took the note just like basically everyone else did. The only people I saw take recall were either people who had some specific interaction they wanted to play with, like farming quick barrows chests, or took recall simply because they really don't like the way Banker's Note trivializes the game. That is fair. Banker's Note absolutely is a crutch, and you can use it to cheese your way through a lot of difficult content with a stack of 10,000 Karambwams. But I personally still like it. I will be honest, I am not good at the game, and I am fine with that. I am still years away from ever attempting Inferno or the Colosseum in the main game, and that is totally okay. But in a temporary game mode with limited time to play, I don't want to be skill locked out of getting all the gear I want. I am fully willing to put in a lot of hours into the game to grind for stuff. I got that dragon rank after all, but there really isn't time for me to do that and also learn the whole Inferno as well. Crutch relics like Banker's Note and Last Stand, which we'll get to later, help bridge that skill gap and let lesser skilled players like myself, who is very bad, still have access to all of the content they want to do. And I think that's great. That's one of the best aspects of playing a league, doing content you normally don't get to do. And hey, now that I've tried this stuff in leagues, I am way more confident that I actually might finish them someday in the real game. I think that's really cool. It really comes down to your philosophy of what a league should be. Is it an all-out power fantasy where the entire game world is at your mercy, or is it something closer to the main game with more reserved power scaling? I lean closer to the former, but I can understand how that might get boring for some, especially if you played a lot of the other leagues previously. Now that we're done with this little game design philosophy tangent, it's time to say that I actually rank this tier as an F rank. That's right, this Relic tier, as a gameplay choice, sucks. Like I hammered on about earlier, Banker's Note is so absurdly strong that there is no choice to be made from a power perspective. That to me isn't interesting at all. you'd need to either find something equally busted to pit Banker's Note against to have any form of competition, or nerf the note in some way to make it a more reasonable choice. Alternatively, you could just give everyone the note for free and sidestep the issue entirely, but that's not really fair to those people who don't like Banker's Note. I wouldn't be against a league without the note at all, though I'd hope we get something good to replace it. I really don't want to do rune crafting without it. Almost at the end now, at tier 7 we have 3 very powerful relics. We'll start with Overgrowth, as that's the one I took. This gives you a great way to solve Herblore if you didn't take Friendly Forager early on, but I mostly took it so I didn't have to do farm runs. I have like 25 million farming experience in the main game. It's not the gameplay I come to leagues for. It was a really nice one to have, even before I got myself a good supply of tree seeds. I could just visit the Master Farmer for a while, and then burn through so many trash allotment and flower seeds to get most of my farming training done that way. My only complaint is the way that ultra composting works with this. The way the relic reads, it looks like you're going to get it for free every time, but you actually have to apply the ultra compost yourself first on each patch before it'll start applying it for you. It's an annoying communication error, but nothing too huge. Farming is one of those skills that's always going to need some power like this to make it palatable. The daily chore nature of the skill isn't something that really meshes with the nature of a league, which is all about going fast. Next up on this list is Pocket Kingdom, which I know a lot of people took. It's another way to meet your herb needs if you don't want to gather your own seeds. Skipping the tedious grinds for things like coal and mahogany logs is also pretty appealing. The rest of the items are pretty lackluster though. Does anyone really need that much flax? Regardless, I can see this being pretty nice for some people's builds, and kind of useless in others, which means it's a pretty well designed relic really. And lastly, we have Grimoire, which is one I saw people go crazy for when it was first spoiled. Honestly though, I think it was kind of overrated. For most people, this relic is going to boil down to getting one prayer they were region locked out of and not much else. I ran the numbers on a DPS calculator, and having Rigor only gave me 3 extra DPS over plain old Eagle Eye. When my DPS was already over 40, it's like adding a firecracker to a nuclear bomb. It's the same story for getting Arceus spells for Thralls. They're going to be a drop in the bucket to my overall DPS. From my region choices, I already had access to Lunar and Ancient spellbooks as well, and I basically never used either of them anyway. Now I'm sure some builds really appreciated this relic, say you wanted a mage build. It's nice that you wouldn't be forced to take the desert just to get Ancients. This relic alone really opened up the decision space for regions people could choose and still end up with effective combat builds. It's not a bad relic by any means, but I don't think it was quite as good as it might seem from first impressions. Overall, I'm giving this tier an A rank. Putting Grimoire, a mostly combat-focused relic, against 2 skilling resource-gathering relics is a little odd, but these are all really good choices. And last up for relics, we had the tier 8 of the powerful combat relics. Specialist is a weird one. The name is fitting as it's only going to be effective in some specific niche builds. Do you have a really strong spec weapon to abuse? Then you take this. Otherwise, you don't. It's straightforward, but I bet it's a lot of fun in the right hands. Not much else to say on that one really. The next 2, however, I feel are much more interesting to talk about as they sort of split players into 2 distinct groups. As I touched on in tier 6 when talking about Banker's Note, Leagues is a great chance for the less skilled among us to have a go at some of RuneScape's most difficult content. Last Stand is the perfect relic for this. It serves as a safety net to bail you out anytime you mess up too badly somewhere, meaning that as long as you can get halfway there on an encounter, the relic will usually give you just enough of a push to get you over the finish line. This removes the skill gap from being an issue in gatekeeping some of the best gear, and therefore some of the best fun, from all of the less skilled players. In the main game, it is fine if bad players like me don't get an Infernal Cape. I can always practice more and get it later, and integrity should matter there. But in a league, everyone gets to feel like they're the best. Abuse the Last Stand if you want and get a quiver. It's going to get deleted in a few weeks anyway. But what I think is the real magic of something like Last Stand is what happens when you reach the point where you can stop relying on it. I'll use the Echo Dagannoth Kings for a good example for this. When I faced them the first time, I was really struggling to get past their last phase, where you basically had to click every tick to stay alive. It felt impossible to keep up with. After dying 5 or so times, I got frustrated and decided I'm going to come back when I get my tier 8 relic. Well, a few days later, I came back with a vengeance and abused Last Stand to power through the final phase and get my first KC. Cool, if it bleeds, we can kill it. I then went through a stage of waiting 3 minutes for the relic to charge between each kill for slow but safe KC. After doing that a few times, I started to get bored with the downtime and decided to try and learn how to properly beat that last phase. So I started to use the Last Stand less like a crutch to beat the fight for me and as a safety net to catch me in case I failed. It took me a few tries, but eventually I managed to get a clean kill with no Last Stand triggering at all. A few KC later, and finally the way the fight worked clicked with me, and I wasn't even taking a single hit anymore. The danger of the fight hadn't changed, and at this point the relic wasn't even doing anything for me. But through its power, I had a much better time learning the new boss and reached competency way faster than I normally would have. I think that's really cool, and I imagine there were thousands of other stories just like this one lived by all the other players who took it too. It's a really nice way to bring that skill floor up and help give people the confidence they need to really tackle some challenging content. And on the flip side, if you're a stronger player who doesn't want or need a little hand holding to help you through the tougher content, well, you get rewarded for that because you get to take Guardian. It's a straight DPS upgrade to all encounters everywhere in the game, basically. So if you're confident enough in your abilities to not need the last stand, you get to be more efficient than all of the plebeians and kill everything slightly faster than them. I think that's a really nice trade-off. Hey, maybe next league I'll be good enough to take Guardian, though probably not. So overall, I'm going to give this tier the honour of an S rank. I think it's really good, with something for everyone in there. And that finally is all the relics. I think overall they did a good job on them. There's a lot of different builds you can make with this lineup. Sure, some tiers are a bit of a wash, but most choices actually took me a while to make, which was fun to think about and to plan. I definitely felt nicely rewarded at the end with my final build. I had coverage for most of the skills, and I didn't have too many areas where I felt like I was stuck playing the game normally. While Relics handled mostly your skilling focused boosts, they tried something new for combat boosts this time with the combat masteries, and I really loved this change. Rather than tying them in with the relics again and locking them behind the regular tasks, you actually have to complete some combat related challenges to get better at combat. It feels a lot better because it feels more like you earned each boost as you had to do some combat without them first, rather than spamming through a bunch of easy skilling tasks until whoops, you're overpowered in combat now. I think it was pretty clever how they structured these challenges as well. They give you a couple free ones to get the ball rolling, and then you've got a choice between grinding out for these easy but slower tasks like getting to 100 combat, or if you're feeling more brave, you can go straight for the more skill-based ones earlier on to get the boost sooner. Lower skill players will focus on the grindy ones first, so then they can use the boosts to help them beat the more challenging ones. But higher skill players can rush the challenges early to use the boosts to finish the grindy parts faster. So no matter what kind of player you are, you should still be able to reach at least tier 6 and get max power in one combat style of your choice, which is where the most fun is, and better players still get to be rewarded for their skill. Good stuff. How were the boosts themselves then? Well, I won't talk about every single one, I need this video to end at some point, but let's start with my choices. I went for a maxed range setup, using the Drygore blowpipe and later a T-bow, and with that I rinsed every monster in my path with a barrage of never missing darts and arrows. You end up with a very consistent and low variability stream of damage in this build, so every KC of a boss ends up taking basically the same amount of time. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, it's just something I noticed. The 100% accuracy was obviously the star of the show here, letting you use range on basically everything, even in places where you normally wouldn't or shouldn't or can't. It was a bit weird how it made a lot of your range gear kind of worthless though, like God D-High doesn't really mean much anymore when accuracy doesn't matter. I'd put all that effort into clues to get it and now I was just throwing it away to wear melee tank gear and prayer robes. It was a little bit strange, but using it was a lot of fun, though I will admit it did get kind of old eventually. I reached the point where my DPS was so high it was less fighting bosses and more rolling a loot simulator for them over and over again. I felt like I was using those death touch darts from RS3, look it up. It was nice to be rewarded for planning the setup and then going out and acquiring all the gear from scratch, but it did trivialise PvM to a level that was maybe a bit much. I wouldn't be surprised to see the power level toned down a little bit next time around. I did end up getting all 10 mastery points and I used the extra 4 to level up melee, though that was mostly just so I could train it faster for maxing. The only place I used it at all was at the Perilous Moons. Tier 6 range is so powerful that even at tier 4, melee felt like I was just playing the base game again by comparison. It wasn't worth using if I didn't have to. From what I saw, a lot of people took the same as me and went full ranged, with melee being a very close second. A major was a rare sight to see. It's hard to tell just from reading it, but at least on paper, mage does look to be a far weaker choice. It doesn't have the consistency of the range mastery or the massive damage potential of the melee one. Plus, there was a lot of reports of the abilities not working together in the way you think they would. The execute clause of the tier 6 mastery didn't seem to take other mastery boosts into account for its max hit, so you were getting a lot less value out of it than you would expect. Whether that was a bug, an oversight, or an intentional nerf, it really must have sucked to be a major and end up being way weaker than you had planned due to stuff like that. Obviously, you'll never get all 3 combat styles totally balanced, but Magic really did feel kind of shallow shafted this league. I hope we'll see the 3 being a bit more even next time. Overall, I think the combat masteries were an excellent system. Separating the combat boosts from the skilling ones is a smart move. And I like that the league has some moments of skill challenge in there instead of just grinding ones. Figuring out how to get my first scurrious kill without decent gear was a fun puzzle, and getting that first fight case run does hit so much harder when my tier 6 range mastery comes at the end of it. I can definitely see this system making a comeback in more leagues. The last major choice we had to make in our league journey were the regions. I went for Varlamore, Desert and Fremnik as I said earlier, and I was very happy with the choice. I got access to almost the highest possible range DPS, plenty of good PVM to use it on, and good skilling options across the board for maxing. Lovely stuff. Limiting the playable area like this is a good way to limit the scope of your adventure so you don't get constant decision paralysis from the huge number of potential things you could be doing at any given moment. It makes you really focus in on the activities available in each of your regions, which are often going to be stuff you never do in the main game. You really do improve your appreciation for how much stuff there is in RuneScape after a good league. Overall, I think it's a great system, but we've had the exact same one now twice in a row, so I do hope we get something different next time around. If we do end up going down the region unlocking path again, maybe a couple of improvements could be made. The first glaring one is Kandarin. The region just doesn't offer enough to be worth taking. It feels weird to have a huge area of the map with no one in it, but maybe there is a solution. One idea I've heard floated around is combining with the Elflands, with the name I can't pronounce, into a single Western Provinces region. I think it's a good idea. The Elflands are also pretty sparse on worthwhile items to acquire, having the blowpipe, the crystal stuff, and well, that's about it. It might help make the 2 regions feel less anemic if we combine them like this. There'd have to be some task rebalancing of course, but I don't think it would be too difficult to remove the worst half of the tasks from each of the 2 regions, smoosh the remainders together and call it a day. I just think it would be nice if all the regions were worth taking in their own respects. But really, the main change I'd want to see for a future hypothetical region-based league would be to have a different starting region, or better yet the ability to choose your own starting region. I get that balancing the tasks for all those different areas might be a little tricky, but the brave chunk men, chunk women and chunk NBs of the world have shown it's basically possible to play the game from any given map square at this point, so I don't think any single region would be impossible to start in these days. Plus, even if some of the regions do end up being a little tricky, that's part of the fun of it, figuring out the puzzle of how the heck you're going to do the basic tasks we all take for granted. Mr. Lane is great and all, but I've done all the content there 2 leagues in a row now, and it'd be nice to have a major shake-up on what the day 1 of a league looks like. Hell, make us all start in that new Western Provinces region we just made. I bet there's an Elflocks account out there just itching to show everyone their knowledge on the subject. One last nitpick on regions, and it's about the lodestone teleport you can do to your unlocked ones. There's nothing wrong with it, it's just that a lot of people didn't know you could do it. It might have been a good idea to include teleporting via the lodestone as part of the League's tutorial we'll have to do at the start, as quite a few people were left scratching their heads wondering how they could get to their newly unlocked region when they couldn't walk to it. Tasks. The guiding beacon of the League's experience. Do as they command and you're sure to have a good time. I thought it would be a fun experience to do a tier list of all of them to see how they weigh up. Starting with, achieve your first level 10. Very easy, you'll get this automatically. But that's good in its own way. C tier, burn some normal logs. Yeah, I'm just fucking with you, I'm not ranking every single task, that would take forever. Though don't worry, I did consider it when writing this. Tell you what, get this video a humble 10 million likes and we'll make it happen. Okay, real talk though, we'll just be going over tasks as a whole and saying what we like and dislike, okay? Let's start with the good. I really like when a task shows you some new thing in the game world you didn't know existed. Whether that's some activity you've never done before, or some little Easter egg interaction you didn't know about, like the magic bird's nest in Aldurin. Speaking of the Varlamore region, taking it as a league region was a great way to learn about all the content the continent has to offer, some of which I didn't even know existed before the league. So it'll be nice to try some of that in the main game when I go back. Tasks are also just nice in general. It's satisfying to see that points total go up, see the little pop up every time. It's like 100 little microdoses of what you get when you get a new collection log slot in the main game. It's a good system that gets you out there trying lots of different things and helps guide your adventure. Ever stuck for what to do next? Just find the next easiest task to do. It's probably something you wanted to do anyway. Now, onto the bad, and I'm sorry if it seems like I have more to say here. I promise it's not me being cynical, it's just way easier to point out problems with something than it is to come up with reasons why it's good. This isn't me farming rage bait. Let's start with something simple. Straight up shit tasks. The first one that comes to mind when I say this are the Sorcerer's Garden tasks. Getting one of each squirk is fine, but all the others are just not worth the time and effort to get them. 10 spring squirks requires 40 fruit, so you need 40 completions of the course, assuming you make no mistakes just to get a measly 30 points. They also want you to do 75 autumn laps and 100 summer laps. It's just not a reasonable time investment compared to other tasks you could be doing for the same points. The wiki shows how low the completion rate is on these. Most people cannot be arsed with them. I get that some tasks are going to be worse than others, but the more bad tasks you leave in, the more sparse and unappealing the task list starts to look as you climb up the ranks. And that's the sort of thing that causes people to burn out of leagues. I think it would be a good move to look at the least completed tasks of each league and maybe cut them from the list, or just change them somehow. These could all be half the amount and I would still hesitate to do them. Next one might be a bit contentious, but it's RNG tasks, anything that requires luck. Now, just like anyone, I love farming a good unique drop, but when some 80-point task that should have taken like 10 minutes ends up taking over an hour, it feels like hitting a brick wall. All of a sudden, your turbocharged fun has been yanked to a dead stop because some dice roll hasn't come up your way yet. I went dry on a bunch of things this league, but for a good example, I went 5 times dry on the brine saber. Like, what an actual joke. It's a useless item that benefits no one, but I needed it for an 80-point task. When you're in that position, it's really a no-win scenario. You stop trying for it, and then it makes all the time you put into it before pointless. You keep going for it, and you feel like you're wasting even more time. This factor of RNG makes going for any sort of rare drop task really unappealing, because you know there's no guarantee you won't be the unlucky guy who goes stupidly dry for it, even with the boosted drop rate. I understand that dryness protection is a very controversial topic in the main game, but I don't really see the problem with it in leagues. It's a temporary game mode where people have limited time to play and grind. We don't need to punish unlucky people by wasting that time waiting for the correct spin on a roulette wheel. Heck, the J-mods clearly knew there was an issue here, as they made sure all the Echo Boss drops had a dryness protection on them. They know what they're doing. In my ideal world, any dropped unique item that is assigned to a task would have some sort of guaranteed drop at like 3 times the drop rate. This puts a hard limit on how unlucky you can be and therefore how long the task can take. But if we really don't want to go down that route, we could change some of those tasks to be kill count based rather than drop based. If instead of get a brine saber it was kill 200 brine rats, that makes the length of the task perfectly consistent, though not quite as exciting. I'd only suggest this kind of approach for the more boring items anyway. I do think we should be less scared of adding bad luck protections in general though. It's fine for a game to respect the player's time, but that's enough of that for now. Next on my list of task-related problems, it's the ungrindable RNG tasks. I put a lot of hours into this league, but I never saw a beekeeper random event. I never got a kebab from the Curter brothers, and worst of all, I never got to kiss a frog. These tasks suck because you have no control on whether you'll get to complete them or not. I can't make more random events appear. I just have to hope that the right one pops up at some point. Yeah, in the grand scheme of it, they don't tie up that many points, but it's not really fair to be locked out of a few hundred points or so through no fault of your own. I can't even grind harder to try and get them. I just need to be blessed with them at some point. I'd hate to be one of those people racing to get max points and lose the race just because I never saw the right random event in time. Either make these consistent somehow or just remove them. I don't think they're needed anyway. Now for some more nitpicky things, such as global tasks that are actually region locked. That bloody killer necromancer task has been mocking me every time I open the task menu, knowing I'm powerless to complete him. The fuck? Yeah, it's pretty minor, but it's annoying to have to scroll past it every time, and I'm sure it confuses a lot of the less knowledgeable players to have the game show you a task, tell you it's completable, but it's actually not. Ideally, they'd find a way to assign a single task to multiple regions so it would only show up if you had either Horrend or Kandarin. I just don't like it when the game lies to me. Next nitpick, why do we only get 1 XP task for combat skills at 50 mil, except for prayer? I get that combat XP got an extra boost this time around, but surely they could have just increased the XP thresholds to compensate. Instead of 25 mil, 35 mil and 50 mil, make it 50, 75 and 100 mil. Just feels a bit lame to be robbed of a few hundred points like that. One last thing I noticed, Superior Slayer encounter tasks. It looks like someone accidentally put 2 different copies of the same concept in there. There seems to be a set of 10, 20 and 50 and a second set for 25, 75, 100. Just a weird oversight on the developer's part. I hope they get a bit more time to test this sort of stuff next time around. Echo Bosses, a brand new feature for this league, along with their associated drops. They were an excellent addition. Not only are we trying existing content a brand new light, but getting brand new content to play with as well. It's a really clever way to test out new ideas because you've got no polling to worry about and no worries about messing up the main game. But you'll also get a huge amount of playtesting done for free as well, far more than you'd get from a normal beta world. I really hope we see this concept expanded on in future leagues even more. Go crazy, make as many bosses as you want, completely revamp 20-year-old systems just to see what happens. Hell, even put 3 new skills in there just to see what people think of them. With it being just a league, you can get away with a lot more than you can in the main game. The Echo bosses are all just recolored versions of existing monsters after all. No one cared. So, how were they to actually fight? Well, the 3 I had access to are the Dagannoth Kings, the Caliphite Queen, and Sol Heredit. I touched on the Dagannoth Kings when I talked about the Last Stand relic, but I do really like them. I initially found that final phase of the fight to be kind of unfair. You really expect me to click every single tick? It felt like way too fast of a rhythm to keep up with consistently, but with perseverance it started to make sense and I got it down. I really liked it in the end because it felt like it was training me to be far better at timing the ticks and hitting correct prayer flicks. It's a skill you might need for something like the Inferno, and I'm way more confident in my ability to do that now. There is something to say about balancing the 3 styles for this fight. The nature of the final phase makes it extra hard for melee players to deal with. You have to be constantly moving, and you'll quickly lose the ability to stand next to Supreme to actually deal effective damage. So your options become trying to tank the damage to get them killed quickly, or switching to Rex as he's the only one who will follow you around the arena, but then he has massive defenses against melee, so the fight takes way longer, and meleeers are likely to end up feeling a bit punished for their choice of combat style here. I'm not really sure how you could fix this without changing the fight entirely, but it's something to think about. For conquering this new prayer flicking skill, I was rewarded with the Emperor Ring and the Amulet of Monarchs, both being best in slot items for the ring and necklace spots. There isn't really much to say on them, they are after all just overpowered DPS increases, but they do work in every single build, and those 2 slots are kind of hard to fill for most players' builds anyway, so it's nice to have that option to get something good for them both. You do get to feel incredibly strong after you acquire these. It's nice to be rewarded for beating a difficult challenge. The next one I farmed was the Echo Caliphite Queen. She was actually quite a lot easier than the DKs. I probably ordered it wrong and should have done her first, but we survived. I really like her new fight. It is a massive improvement to the usual KQ dilemma of waste all your food on this crap or spend all day flinching her. They could swap the main game KQ with this Echo version tomorrow and I would be totally okay with it. Nostalgia be damned. It is a way better designed fight for modern RuneScape. All the damage in the fight is avoidable, but you have to pay attention and be on point to avoid it. Nothing in the fight was extremely difficult. It was definitely an easier fight than the DKs were, but it was enough to make me sit up and pay attention. The reward for solving this fight is the Drygore Blowpipe, which lets you fire the darts you've probably already been throwing with plus 10 range strength and plus 3 extra range. It also has the same double accuracy roll mechanic that the Fang is famous for. Now this is kind of a weird bonus to add because by the time I got the weapon, I already had made this ability obsolete by having the tier 6 range mastery, which makes everything 100% accurate anyway. It is a weird non-combo to put this ability on a range weapon in this league. My guess would be that they intended this to be a way for people to have access to a powerful range weapon without needing to go fully into maximum range masteries, for people who wanted to do things like split their points and go into multiple styles. Against a high defense monster like a 500 invocation barbar, skipping out on the tier 6 upgrade means you miss out on about 8 DPS and will start missing about 23% of the time. It's not unbearably bad, but most people I spoke to said they were going to go fully into tier 6 of their chosen style anyway, so this boost was probably not relevant to the majority of players who used it. Still, darts were the best DPS a ranger could get in most places, so adding a little extra damage and doubling the range is a nice bonus. The range upgrade is honestly a much bigger deal than you first think. It saves you a lot of ticks from not having to run around as much during something like a Slayer task, and it makes you much less likely to get dragged out of a safe spot when doing something like Inferno. It's probably a much bigger deal than the DPS increase really. I'd have liked to see a different bonus buff on it so that it still did something special for those who maxed their range mastery, but I still got a lot of use out of it and it was fun to use. Last and not least, I tackled the Echo Sol Heredit. Now this was my first time ever really doing any Colosseum, and I'm not yet good enough to do it properly, so I was cheesing it using Banker's Note and Last Stand. I did eventually get to the point where I could power through the Echo Sol Heredit fight without needing these crutches, but I was doing it with a 100% accurate T-bow, so I can't really speak to the mechanics much, as I wasn't doing it in the proper way. Still, from my newbie perspective, it is a pretty intense and difficult fight. It's essentially a hard version of the usual final fight, but with a set of predefined and extra difficult modifiers added. There's lasers and lava and healing snakes, and it really does feel like you're fighting a god out there. It's a really cool fight. I bet if you tried to do this properly with a melee loadout and no cheesing relics, you'd have a really satisfying challenge if that's your sort of thing. But for scrubs like me, it serves more as a nice practice mode to see what the boss is all about without having to waste my main game supplies or die to the waves 100 times. I really love getting a chance to try it out, and for conquering this mighty challenge you get rewarded with 2 items, the Sunlight Spear and the Sunlit Bracers. I didn't get a huge amount of use out of the spear. It is a strong weapon, but DPS wise, with tier 4 melee masteries, it got outperformed by other weapons in the few places I was using melee at. The spec is very powerful and has the unique ability to hit way higher than any other weapon due to its typeless nature. A good example was the Huey Coatl shielded tail phase. The spec hits for full damage instead of having the usual huge reduction, which lets you get pretty fast solo kills or speed it up for your team. It's a cool weapon overall, just not really right for my build. Now, the Sunlit Bracers are the item I was really after. Really good combat stats for the glove slot, which just like the ring and amulet is a hard spot to get relevant items for, but the healing ability it has is its most powerful trait. Double healing from all sources is huge. Bearing in mind this stacks with the combat mastery passive that also boosts all healing and works with the heal every 5th hit of the range mastery, means that you could be healing 11 hit points every 5 ticks with a 1-tick weapon like the blowpipe. That's an insane amount of sustainability and lets you basically forego the need to eat any food in most places. But if you do really mess up and need to eat, you can heal to full from a single combo eat, or just 2 Karen Bows will get you most of the way there. It's an insanely powerful safety net to have such a huge amount of both continuous and burst healing at your disposal with these on. A difficult boss should give a very strong reward, but it does feel a little strange that a safety net item, something that would naturally benefit weaker players more than stronger ones, is locked behind something designed to be one of the most difficult challenges in the game. Maybe this ability could have benefited more people if it was attached to something a little lower down the food chain, but I'm not necessarily saying it's a problem. Overall, Echo bosses were an amazing addition. I really hope we'll see more of this sort of stuff in the future leagues as well. That's all the main areas of what makes a league reviewed, so I'd like to use this section just to talk about any other issues that I couldn't fit in elsewhere. Starting with group tasks. I'd like to see anything that requires more than one player in the main game either become soloable or auto-completed. There's no good reason to arbitrarily require me to have a group of people for things like combat tasks that I could easily do on my own, especially if you're trying to do them in the last few weeks of the league when everyone else has quit. It feels like an unnecessary restriction. Forestry. It's in a pretty awful place in the main game at the minute, but it should have had its anima bark boosted like minigame points in the league. I did all of my woodcutting to 99 at forestry spots and participated in most of the events, and yet still didn't get enough bark to buy a single forestry related task item. That is a kind of sick joke. Please, next time, just boost the anima bark. It's fine. Animations. Specifically, the sort of long unskippable ones you have to face at bosses, like when the Calphite Queen changes form, or when the Abyssal Sire walks from one spot in the room to another spot in the room. When you're killing bosses as fast as you do in leagues, these animations end up becoming a significant part of your overall KC time, meaning that a good percentage of your time is spent not actually playing the game and instead just waiting for these animations to finish. They sped up the respawn time on most everything, which was an excellent change, so I hope we can get a similar one for stuff like this. It just removes that unnecessary friction. Quests. Now don't get me wrong, I am one of the few people who actually enjoys questing in the main game. Reading the dialogue and enjoying a new story is a really nice break from the usual grinding of RuneScape. But in a league, replaying through a quest I've already done isn't at all interesting. I'm not going to properly immerse myself with a story when I just want to rush to the end to get the rewards. If it was up to me, all the quests relevant to your unlocked regions would just be auto-completed whenever those regions were unlocked. Every single one. They let us skip most of the important ones anyway, like Desert Treasure 1 and 2, but make us do Beneath Cursed Sands? It's not a huge quest, I know, but it's not exactly Cook's Assistant either. It's a big slowdown in pace to have to go out of your way to fetch a laundry list of items, talk to a bunch of NPCs while holding spacebar, especially since all of your relics and boosts will have no impact on your speed of completing the quest, unless it has a boss fight in it or something. I don't know anyone who likes doing quests in leagues. I think they can go. Soul Wars. For 2 leagues in a row now, Soul Wars has been a sort of forced hangout spot for a lot of us. If you don't have better alternatives, it might be your only good option to train prayer and together pure essence to train your runecrafting with at any reasonable speed. It's good that everyone has access to this so no one is forced to mine essence like it's 2005, but frankly, I got bored of it pretty fast. It's not a great minigame to begin with, and it turns into a complete mess in leagues with all the combat boosts. If you're trying to play it properly, someone with Last Stand can just run through all of your defenses and kill your avatar before his invincibility wears off. A mage could stop them with a freeze, but there's not many of those running around, so you can never count on that happening. You also end up with this massive conflict of interest between the half of the players who want to finish rounds as fast as possible to get quick points, and the other half that wants to engage in that meathead PvP. like two American football teams running headfirst into each other. Then they end up yelling at each other because half of their team isn't doing what they want them to do, and it's not a fun experience to have that going on behind you. I'm not entirely sure how to fix it. There aren't many places in the game that can give you as much pure essence as 8 times points boosted Soul Wars loot crates. Maybe a rune crafting specific relic could help? Regardless, I hope I don't have to do much Soul Wars in the next league. Me head PvP was fun the first few times, but it gets old very fast. When everyone is super, no one is. And last on this list, I want to make a point about restraint. Specifically with Jagex having it when it comes to spacing out the release of new leagues in the future. I can imagine on the corporate side, seeing those huge spikes in concurrent player numbers and revenue lines going up must get a lot of people in boardrooms very excited. And hell, it gets me going too. Leagues are something I look forward to a lot, but we must be careful not to get carried away. Leagues are great because they're special, they don't come around that often. I can understand it might be tempting to ask them to come more often, but I promise you, they will have very diminishing returns. The nature of leagues and their temporary status creates a lot of FOMO, fear of missing out. And if you do too much of that, you start to step into some very ugly territory where you're less creating a fun experience for your players and more holding them hostage. I've seen people request leagues every 6 months or even shorter, and at the risk of sounding like that one infamous WoW clip, you think you want that, but you really don't. Once a year I think is absolutely fine. It gives me enough time to get my life in order between each league. I do just hope that Jagex, or perhaps I should say the executives behind Jagex, will be disciplined enough not to try and force more eggs out of this golden goose. Damn, that's a lot of yapping about leagues. That's probably more than anyone wanted to hear, but thank you very much for any time you did spend with me today. I always see a lot of talk about a league before it comes out, and then everyone very quickly stops talking about it, and I think that's a shame. So this video is my way of trying to fix that. Hopefully by talking about everything in detail like this, we can start to see what really makes for a good league, so we can get an even better one next time. But that about does it. More videos will be coming from me soon, so please do click the buttons to make the numbers go up if you want to help motivate me to make those, and I'll see you all next time. Peace!